Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. This is the first video in a little series I'm going to do about rare books on treasure hunting. So these are treasure hunting subject books written by some authors that were all characters, and most of these guys are deceased. I'm going to show you just a little overview of some of the stuff I'm going to show you in this series. I'll start by telling you that I found that one of these authors, a guy by the name of Frank Fish, was a local here in a town just 25 miles from here. So I was able to do a lot of research on him, and that's what this first video is on, is the life and times of Frank Fish and the books that he wrote. Well, by all accounts, Frank Fish was a very mysterious guy. So he enters into Chino, California by opening up a gold rush museum. And soon after that, he met another woman who was also, well, she also had a background in treasure hunting. And she had bought some property up in Amador City, California, which is actually up northern California in gold country. And she bought a building in particular that was the old Wells Fargo building in town. And she told Frank that she had some artifacts in the building when she bought it, and it was already set up like a museum. About 3 months later, I think Frank lost his lease down there in Southern California for some reason. And he called his friend up there in Amador City, and they agreed that he would move his whole operation up to Northern California, to Amador City. So he showed up with the trailer full of all his artifacts, brought everything inside, set it up, and a few days later he had a full gold rush museum set up in Amador City. And a lot of tourism came in because of that, and a lot of people got to hear his stories and see some of the things that he had dug. Not only were there things from South America, but there were also lots of gold bars and silver bars and coins that he reportedly found here in the States. So Frank had a little trailer that he lived in right on the edge of town, and it was just across the street and around the corner from where his museum was. He was known to walk through town all the time with a shotgun in hand, which was quite odd because nobody else in town did that. And they didn't know what to think of him at first. But as people got to know him and talked to him inside his museum and heard some of his stories, they actually adopted him, and he became quite liked in town. People that knew Frank said he had a lot of really solid leads on lost treasures, especially in gold country and up in Northern California. So he had so much research that he had acquired that he reportedly even came into possession of one of 2 pieces of a map to the Lost Dutchman's mine in the Superstition Mountains in Arizona. At this point, you could say that there was a lot of people that were down there digging in Arizona trying to find that Lost Dutchman's mine. And when they found out that Frank might have the other half of that map, things really got complicated in Frank's life as he realized that he had something that important. He became very secretive and very guarded about a lot of information. And he was a loner anyway. On most of his hunts, he went out by himself and hunted. He refused to go with other people. So after collecting all the research and all those treasure leads, Frank decided to write a book. This is the book that he wrote. Once that book was published, people got to know who Frank Fish was. Tourists came from all around to meet him, talk to him, and see this museum. One thing that most were surprised by is that he had live rattlesnakes in cages inside his museum. And he reportedly let these rattlesnakes out at night to crawl around the floor freely as kind of a built-in security system. He was not afraid of rattlesnakes, that's for sure, and in town he had the reputation of being the guy to call if somebody saw a rattlesnake. So we skip ahead to April 1963, and in the evening at the Amador Hotel, there was a bunch of phone calls that came in a string. They were all looking for Frank. And at some point, somebody from the hotel walked over across the street to Frank's trailer, knocked on his trailer, got him up out of bed, and Frank walked across the street, got on the phone, and witnesses say that he turned ghost white pale and had very little to say, but he listened for quite a while in the phone call. Just nodded his head and said yes a few times and walked back to his trailer in a really unusual mood. The next morning, Frank's body was discovered inside his trailer with one single gunshot wound to his ear. And there was also a suicide note near his body. The note was very suspicious, as people that knew Frank didn't recognize it to be his handwriting. And had very little to say, but one of the things it did say was that he would like for somebody to have the water tested in the pond behind his trailer, that he thinks he was poisoned. And Frank had also been to a doctor and visited several times just a few months before his death, as he was struggling with diabetes. So people wondered if maybe the doctor told Frank that he was going to lose his eyesight or lose his legs, and that's why he killed himself. But somebody contacted the doctor, and the doctor assured them that he did not say anything like that to Frank. In fact, he told Frank that Frank should be able to change his diet and live a normal life. By the time Frank's body was discovered that morning, his museum had already been broken into, and the thieves used a key to open the door. There was only 2 known sets of keys. One of them was still hanging inside Frank's trailer on the wall. The other set mysteriously disappeared, but somebody had used a key to get inside. They took all his gold nuggets, all his gold dust, and lots of his other treasures that he had on display. They also ransacked the inside of the building looking for papers apparently, as every single box was gone through and papers were strewn all over the floor of the museum. If any documents were taken, nobody will ever know what they were because nobody had ever looked at Frank's documents to see what he had. And if Frank really was in possession of the other Peralta stone, we'll never know if that was taken either because nobody had ever seen it. Frank had only told people that he had it. Over the next couple weeks, the museum was broken into several more times until almost everything inside was gone. So in doing the research for this video, I drove about 22 miles out to Amador City from where I live and walked through town. I was able to take a lot of pictures, as you see here, and talk to a couple people in town that were longtime residents. In fact, a couple of them were alive in 1963 and remembered Frank. They told me stories all about lost treasure even just in town, where apparently several buckets of pay dirt and heavy black sands were buried somewhere in town and were never found. They showed me where his trailer was and where he lived. About half the people that I talked to believed that Frank did commit suicide, and the other half didn't. One thing that everybody seemed to agree on, though, was that the investigation of his death was very limited. Apparently, the sheriff came out, took photos, collected the suicide note, called the coroner, and were never heard from again. There was virtually no investigation done after the day he died. And the woman that I talked about earlier, who had a bit of a background in treasure hunting and who bought the property in Amador City that Frank moved his museum into, was a lady by the name of Lake Erie Schaefer. And she wrote a book a couple months after Frank died called Dead Men Do Tell Tales. This book is very collectible in its first printing. Even in the second printing, very hard to find. Very few copies of this book were ever made. She was with Frank just a few days before he died, and she had drove down to Los Angeles to get some supplies together so that her husband and Frank could go on a treasure hunt together. And then she got the phone call while down in Los Angeles that Frank's body was found. And after a 7-hour drive, she was in Amador City. By that time, like I said, the museum had already been ransacked and several of his valuables were missing. In the very beginning of this video, I talked about Frank starting out down in Southern California in Chino. You know, there's really just not a lot of information online, and there's not a lot written in books either about Frank's life, especially those early years. I could just imagine the stories that he could tell. So I encourage you to find the books that you can and read them and go online, do some searching, and maybe you could find out some information that I wasn't able to come across, or maybe you have some stories, and man, that'd be awesome if you could go down into the comment section below and share those stories with me or ask me any questions you may have, and I'd love to see your comments and I'll answer every one of them. What this video is really about is Frank Fish as an author and about his rare books. So, as I said earlier in the beginning of this video, I'd love to collect rare treasure hunting books, and he's one of those authors that has a couple books out there that are really tough to find and worth a lot of money. So that's it for this video on the story of Frank Fish, and I hope that you'll stay tuned for the next video in this series where I talk about another famous treasure hunter and author, and that is Carl von Mueller. That's going to be a doozy of a video as well, and we'll see you then. If you like this kind of content, go ahead and click the like button down below and also subscribe. That way you'll know when my new videos come out. You'll get a notification. Until next time, wishing you happy trails, and we'll catch you later.